And so welcome everyone to our weekly call, which this week for the 1st of November, we're going to, in a moment, talk about the additional support for DDR within Windows, which Tommy Jensen is going to sort of talk about and hopefully sort of take a few questions. Then we're going to go back to the topic of last week of some of the key sessions in IETF 112 and just reprise that and then cover a few other points under any other business. And for anyone that is looking at the chat, I'll put the link that accompanied the Microsoft announcement in the chat if you don't have that immediately to hand. But with that in mind, Tommy, I saw was on. So, Tommy, can I hand over to you to just elaborate a little on the Microsoft announcement, I think in conjunction with Cisco or with the support of Cisco and Quad9?
Absolutely. So just to give everyone a quick overview, DDR, or Discovery of Designated Resolvers, which has no unfortunate collisions with any other definition of DDR, is a draft that addresses how a stub resolver can bootstrap its way into encrypted DNS when it knows a resolver only by IP address, which limits us to plain text communication. The gist of it is that we take advantage of the new record type 64, the service binding record, and make a request for a new special use domain name, resolver.arpa. The recursive resolver should respond to that query as if it were addressed for itself, the purpose of the SUDN, and provide configuration within the service binding record for DO or DOT or anything else. The sub-resolver can then use that information to set up a connection and then confirms the validity of the information by looking at the TLS certificate of the new connection and verifying that it claims in its subject alternate name field the IP address of the resolver you started with. This has the flexibility of being able to move from one IP address to another. It has the limitation that the starting IP address needs to be in the public space, in that TLS certificates aren't going to be issued that are signed for private addresses. So it doesn't address all scenarios. It specifically was meant to address scenarios where you only have an IP address, but within the public space. So with that acknowledgement in hand to help scope the conversation, we'll just move directly to what's going on now. Windows Insider currently has this configured using the test name. So for context, the service binding record didn't have formally a number yet, and it still doesn't, but a key for the DO path value, which for DO is explicitly interesting. So we, in working with Quad9 and Cisco, chose test numbers from the reserved range for private use. And so those numbers are used by Windows today, but it means that if you're not using one of those numbers, it won't work right out of the box. But we recently deployed the new number that's in the service binding record draft that Ben just updated, which is 7, as the working group gave us approval to consider that the number that will be approved eventually by IANA. So we support the 2 test numbers and 7 today in the preview. So anyone that stands up a service, just be aware. I'm grateful. We are all grateful internally to Cisco and Quad9, who worked through several bugs with us that otherwise would have been hard to find and somewhat embarrassing to deploy. So thank you for that. I've been using both providers with DDR in my Windows box that I'm currently speaking with you from, where if they fail, I'll have no DNS. I require the system to give me DO or bust. I don't provide any DO definitions. And so far, so good. So with that said, happy to answer any questions people have, unless John or Vinny are online and want to add anything else.
See,
I
John,
just wanted to point out Cisco is using the value of 7, not the test numbers we originally started with. So just a minor point there.
Quad9 is not yet converted over to 7, and we're still using the test numbers, but that's pending some more discussion. Thanks to Microsoft for making this happen. I'm really excited to see progress on this. I think it's going to be a much better world to live in rather than the pickless world.
okay, thanks, Tommy, Vinny, and John. I see Ralph and Paul have both got their hands raised. So Ralph, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so did I read it correctly that there is no whitelist on this, that the only thing that I need to pretty much need to have to be able to use that is a cert that has an alternative name over an IP address or over the IP address of the resolver. Is that correct? So if I stand up something on any IP address I have, that will work, a public IP address.
That is correct. One of the best parts of DDR is that we can move away from what I described 2 years ago as our stopgap test data gathering measure, because the list we put into Windows was not intended ever to be an expression of trust, but rather one of bootstrapping, because we took the hard line of saying we will not allow DOE templates to be bootstrapped through existing DNS relationships, because if we're going to set up a DOE relationship, we want to know there's no plain text beforehand. DDR was what we saw as the correct way to do that in a secure fashion. So yes, it's generic. If you stand up a service that uses the service binding draft and the DDR draft as described, it should just work. And if it doesn't, I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, well, I'll need to figure out a Windows machine first, but yeah, we'll do that.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. Paul?
So I know my customers and my engineers are going to ask me the same question. Is there any possibility in the Windows preview to turn off the checking that would require it to be public versus private? Or any way to make it, honor the certificate checks a little bit less than it would normally honor the certificate checks, right? People love to test these things. And so, if there's some nice way to do that, even in a future build, that would be helpful.
That is a good question. Not specifically to DDR. We are using our existing HTTP stack, WinHTTP, which uses S-channel under the hood. I'm guessing there is a mechanism generic to that would allow you to loosen those restrictions, but I don't know off the top of my head. I can follow up on the list.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Hanny has posted a question in the chat. How is Microsoft's DDR implementation going to work in private address space 192.168.xx? Are you going to support relaxed validation to allow responses from the ISP's home routers as a DNS proxy? Can the residential gateway respond with the DOE template and point to a remote DOE server? Thank you.
So a couple things here. One, an indication that Paul's question is popular. We have no intention of specific to DDR saying, let's go ahead and relax the requirement, because that was kind of the whole point of DDR. The system will provide ways. I know it provides some way of relaxing certificate checking in general. That will come with all the normal caveats of be careful when you do that, scoping, etc. However, I'm also seeing here a question about how the residential gateway scenario where you have a local forwarder and you want to have your clients end up communicating with a offsite DOE server is really best addressed by DNR, another draft that I'm a big fan of, biased because, my name's on it. But I'm also a big fan regardless. Discovery of network designated resolvers, which will allow DHCP and RA to directly carry the DOE template within, so that none of this bootstrapping network exchange is required beyond the initial network discovery that the computer is already doing. I know that that has a different drawback, that it's harder to deploy. It requires changes on the actual endpoint, but in time, that will be the correct way to do this, that will actually work right out of the box and be trusted by everybody. There's no bickering about, well, what's over plain text. At least if we get to that point, it's because we're debating encrypting DHCP, and that's a long way off, I certainly hope.
So okay, I'll just throw in a supplemental there. It was sort of implied in what you said, Tommy. So do you envisage Windows supporting DNR in due course?
With time, yes. It doesn't make sense for us to jump the gun there if no one's deploying it on the receiving side. But yes, it's part of the whole solution. That's been the challenge in the ADD working group, right? Is that we've been trying to find a good way to tackle the entire scenario. And as I noted, DDR tackles a portion of it, but not all of it. And the working group agreed that DDR and DNR should hold hands and move forward into the brave future together. And I agree with that. The reason you're not hearing anything about it from us yet is that we have resolvers implementing DDR, but we don't have endpoints implementing DNR, which is understandable. It's not a judgment, because that's a much harder space to deploy in time-wise, interacting with actual hardware. But when it does, you can expect that we will follow.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just carry on through the chat queries and then come to Ralph next after the chat queries. Brett has posted, has posted a solution that works for him in the chat for Quad9 by the look of it. So thank you for that, Brett. But then you've put a question on the bottom. Brett, do you want to just expand on your question at the bottom there? You may be on mute.
Well, and I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't know right off the top of my head why that would be the case. Are you running the latest build from Insider? Because obviously there will be some Insider builds where we first introduced the feature where reliability was maybe less than it is today. If this is on the latest, maybe we should take this to email one-on-one, because I don't know for sure.
Anything you want to add, Brett, to that? No, it's not getting sound. So, okay.
But expressive video.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, it's always frustrating when that happens.
Sorry, Brett.
And David's put it, David K, that is, has put that Cisco only does it with some of their umbrella IPs, and the list is on there.
Well, maybe I should check my own list before I go mouthing off about what does and doesn't work.
Ah,
Can you hear me now?
that's worked, Brett.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I was talking to myself earlier. No, I'm sending my query to my Unix host using DIG, so I'm not using Windows at all. It was just really, and I think that David K's just clarified what probably why I'm not getting the answer, because I'm sending my query to the only open DNS IP address that I remember, and so I'm probably just sending it to one of the ones that's not listed in the blog post. So I'll go check the blog post and I'll send it to the right address, and that'll probably work then.
Well, and that is, so I just opened the blog post to remind myself, and that's exactly it. So I remember now what's going on. There's a subset of their resolvers that Cisco has deployed on. I don't want to speak for Vinny, but I'm guessing, rollout the same that we're doing.
Yeah.
You don't see it in product yet. So if you use 146.112.40.12, it should work just fine. I'll drop it in the chat right now.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I blogged about the IP addresses on all of the Cisco Umbrella resolvers. We've now actually implemented it in our main resolvers. So Pretty much
Ooh.
all of Umbrella now supports this protocol.
It may just be a timing issue. So as it proves the old adage, if in doubt, read the documentation. Or use a Windows machine rather than Unix.
Never.
Right, moving swiftly on. Ralph, you've raised your hand again.
Yeah, so two things. One remark, I believe the popular question that was asked, will it work on the private network, is something that Ben Schwartz covers in its draft Schwartz at DDR forwarders draft, which I believe will be discussed at the next IETF. So you might want to chime in there. Another question that I had while I was kind of looking how to do it in my home network is kind of, first of all, the DDR draft has an opportunistic upgrade kind of solution if you're using the same IP address. Is that supported by Windows? And if so, is it also supported if I'm using IPv6 ULA addresses?
That is a good question. I've done no testing along this path, so I'm going to say no. But it's not out of objection to that portion of the draft or anything else. I just haven't tested it. I will take that as an item of interest. It's interesting because we added that to help cover bases where it meets the security model in that it's exactly the same level of trust we were expressing by using that IP address with plaintext DNS anyway. But there wasn't anyone who was particularly saying, yes, that is the reason we're going to adopt or support. Is this a feature of active interest for your scenarios?
It's pretty much how I have laid out my home network. So it's not, I mean, others might have also had the same thing. I want to kind of have the secure communication even over my Wi-Fi, if possible.
Okay, good to know.
Okay, anyone else got any questions for Tommy? Either raise your hand or pop a query in the chat. I'll just give you a minute or so to do that. I'm not seeing any hands raised currently, so, and I'm not seeing anything new in the chat. So, well, hopefully that will give people sort of some food for thought. And John,
Sure. I'll raise a hand with what I think should be the next question following this discussion. Is anybody aware of anybody else implementing or looking at deploying this code even on an experimental basis? The answer is probably no, but you don't know until you ask.
Yeah, good point. Given that we've had announcements from Cisco and Microsoft sort of back to back.
Well, I should say, does anyone know of anything that's public? Let me be more specific.
Yeah. So anyone else got anything in the pipeline that they want to highlight that they're aware of, be it for DDR or indeed DNR for that matter?
Notably, I'm interested in open source initiatives that are starting to work on this at all. I haven't heard anything from them, but can't keep track of everything either.
Yeah.
No.
Well, sorry, I didn't put my hand up, but we are going to be adding the records and seeing how it works out. But that's about it for the moment at DNS filter.
We nominate will likely do this on our recursive service as well, but that only faces the public sector in the UK. It's not public, so.
But we'll also be doing some testing to see how it works out. So I'll have some feedback as to the effectiveness of it.
All right, well, you never know, there might be some more news coming during the ADD session in a week or so as well, I guess, potentially. But, well, good to know that Nominet and DNS Filter are doing some work in the meantime. And I see Vinny, whilst we've been chatting, has put in the chat a current definitive list of Cisco resolvers that should work for anyone that's interested in that. So have a look in the chat. And I will put those in the post with the call recording after the call, in case you can't cut and paste it from the chat. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much for that very timely update, Tommy, and for taking questions. I'm sure there'll be a lot more interest over the coming weeks as people get to grips with it. So no doubt some more questions will be coming your way as the sort of testing plays out. But yeah, very positive news that stuff is actually being deployed. Code is being run, to paraphrase the IETF's key phrase.
It's a comforting stage after years of discussion in this area.
Yeah.
And a lot of thanks out to a bunch of people in this audience who helped temper some of the initial approaches, especially from our own side. In fact, I see Andy on the line. It's been a while, but Andy was one of the first to give feedback on how we approach this, just as an example. So this is represented by a relatively small group, but represents the discussion of a very, very wide group. So thank you, Andrew, for continuing to run these calls.
Oh, you're very welcome, which I will continue to do as long as there's interest. So there's a threat to everyone.
Yeah.
Right, brilliant. All right, well, that positive note, and let's take a look at the current agenda for IETF, which I said we would come back to this week. So let me just share my screen. So hopefully you can see a slide. Oh, maybe I've gone one slide too far. That's annoying. It looked so. Right, technical problems. That's never a good start, is it? Let me just try that one more time. Oh no, that is right. Sorry. Right. So this is just a reprise of what we discussed last week, but with a little bit more detail on some of the sessions. So I'll run through this relatively quickly, and as before, I'll share the slides afterwards. And you'll see that there are links. Each of the sessions there's a link. I've updated the links, so if it's available, the link will now go to the agenda for the session. There's about 40% or so of the working group sessions now have agendas. So it will either take you to the sort of generate page for the working group, or if the agenda existed when I did the update around lunchtime today, it will take you through to the working group agenda. So no changes on this first slide. So just a reminder that on Wednesday of this week, the IETF plenary takes place 13:30 to 1500 UTC. So a little early in the morning for those of you on the West Coast. Slightly more convenient time for those of us in Europe. And then the IETF meeting proper starts next Monday, unless of course you're doing the coding session that I think runs through this week as well, but I haven't put that on the slide. So the sessions proper begin next Monday with the multiplexed application substrate over quick encryption session, which doesn't trip off the tongue too quickly, or mask, and art dispatch, to the sessions which are running, or to the working group groups would have got sessions in session 1 on Monday. I think Mask had the agenda, but nothing in particular jumped out at me, and the dispatch session doesn't yet have an agenda. Session 2, you've got the oblivious HTTP application intermediation session, which again I think has the agenda, and that should be sort of did look pretty relevant. And at the same time, the transport area working group, and then session 3 on Monday. You got the ADD working group, which you hopefully have seen on the mailing list, the draft agenda for that, which is more fleshed out than quite a few of the other working group agendas. So sort of due credit to our co-chairs for sort of getting that knocked into shape much more quickly than many of the others, which is really helpful. And there's plenty of content on there, including a reprise of the 2 papers which have got an extended call for adoption, which we'll maybe come back to. Sort of going through to Tuesday, security dispatch is in session 1 amongst others. No agenda for that yet. Measurement and analysis for protocols in session 2, amongst other things included within that a slot covering exploiting misconfiguration and vulnerability of DDoS DNS, which I thought was worth highlighting in case you haven't seen that. And then in session 3, we got TLS working group, which includes, amongst other things, an update on where ECH is at the moment. So in my humble opinion, that's definitely worth listening in on, as well as in parallel with that, the IETF open meeting. But I think I'd certainly prioritize getting the update on ECH. Jumping through to Wednesday, you got the Madness session taking place, which includes use cases as well as a general update on the current state of affairs of the working group. So that's probably the most immediately applicable for people, although in parallel with that, you've got Quick happening as well. Transport area working group in session 2, and then in session 3, 2 quite relevant sessions. One is human rights protocol considerations, which includes a discussion about the Global Internet Governance Forum, IGF, its history and future. And in parallel with that, the only BOF of the IETF meeting, which is privacy respecting incorporation of values, and definitely worth just catching up with the background on that if you have time in advance, just to get the background and also see the agenda. There's quite content rich by the look of it, the agenda for the working for the BOF session, with quite a few use cases included. And then just coming towards the sort of latter part of the week, on Thursday, Deprive includes recursive to authoritative DNS with unauthenticated encryption. One of a pair of papers which has been knocking around for some time on the mailing list. So I'm pretty sure Tommy and Paul and Peter will be very keen to try and see progress on that in the working group. After that, you've got the IAB open meeting, which includes a discussion on the recent IAB workshop by measuring network quality for end users. And in my humble opinion, it's always good to see mention of end users at some point in the week of IETF. And then in parallel with that, you've got the PEARG sort of research group, which is looking at the couple of things that sort of jumped out at me. One was sort of looking at privacy preserving techniques in the network layer, and then a second paper, which I think Yari was presenting, privacy improvements for DNS resolution with confidential computing, talking about running a DNS resolver within a confidential computing environment. Quite an interesting paper if you have time to look at that. And then sort of finally on Thursday, you got the first DNS op session, as well as the security area open meeting. I don't think either of them had an agenda yet. hopefully we'll do the next few days, which takes us through to Friday, where you got Shmoo taking place, looking at so the whole virtual meeting approach, the second of the 2 DNS ops sessions, and then finally back end of Friday, the 2 that jumped out to me were the sort of second of the transport area working group meetings, or extensions for scalable DNS service discovery, potentially of interest. Now, I rattled through those pretty quickly. Did anyone pick up on anything else that sort of jumped out at you, or have anything you thought worth adding to those? And as I say, I will share the slides afterwards, including the links, if they're useful to you. See, yes, and John quite rightly has put the a link in the chat to the calendar-friendly agenda page, which I'm sure you'll all be aware, but you can change the local time zone if you're not in the local time, to make it even easier to see what's happening when. Right, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm assuming that covered the main things people were likely interested in. So as I say, I'll share the slides, and then hopefully in the next few days the missing agendas will be added in, which will make it possible to validate which ones are definitely worth joining the session. And whilst we've been chatting, I can also see Tommy's put an answer to Ralph and others in the chat about using the cert validation APIs. So I'll leave you to read that at your leisure, but I will post that also with the recording for reference. Okay, which rather helpfully then, so I'll keep on talking. I'll just share this one last slide. Takes us on to any other business. So few things I was going to highlight, which I'll just quickly run through and then see if there's anything anyone else wants to pick up on. So in the order they are on the screen, I mentioned this in passing earlier. Our ADD working group co-chairs have extended the call for adoption for 2 papers. As a reminder, that's the deployment considerations paper and the split horizon DNS draft as well. So if you've got any views on the adoption of those, please put those, post your views to the ADD mailing list. And on the slide, you'll see there's a link to the email message, which I think Glenn sent out on behalf of him and Dave, just confirming that they'd extended the consultation period. And I know that both papers have got slots on the agenda for the ADD session next week as well. So there'll be a sort of further chance to ask questions should you have any of those. But yeah, I think it'd be helpful to the co-chairs for more people to put their views either way on adoption on the list if possible. Was that someone trying to come in or just a throat clearing? I'll take it as a throat clearing. 2 other things to highlight. Firstly, if you've didn't see it in the weekly headlines, Cloudflare have just put out an update on ECH. So it's quite a lengthy update, so well worth looking at the Cloudflare blog, and you'll see the link there that gives their current state, sort of a view on ECH, quite timely. I'm sure that's not coincidental as a precursor to discussion in the TLS working group next week. So quite useful to catch up on that. And then finally from me, also next week, but in the morning, UTC and European time, so not clashing with IETF 112. On Wednesday, I think it is the 10th, the European Commission's high-level internet governance group is convening, and it's got a number of sort of DNS specific items on the agenda, including a much delayed update on the DNS4 EU project, also an update on the DNS abuse study, and also on DOE developments. I didn't think to ask them. I'm not sure if anyone on this call is doing the DOE update. I know, Victoria, you did one before. Yes, yeah, you covered it in chat as I posed the question. So Victoria is doing the DOE development slot, but there's also, I think the Commission itself will be talking about the DNS4 EU project, which is the sort of, if you like, the Commission's sort of sponsored DOE resolver, or DNS resolver, not just DOE, and also there'll be a paper covering the sort of DNS abuse study, as always with those meetings, time permitting, because the agenda is usually quite ambitious for the amount of content, because it's pretty content rich. I see Simon has raised his hand in the chat. Did you want to come in? You might need to unmute first, Simon. Or perhaps you didn't raise your hand. No, maybe not. Okay. Right, well, let me stop sharing at that point and say, yeah, that was everything from me for this week. Does anyone else have anything else that you would like to raise? So anything else on people's minds at the moment? And obviously, if Simon did mean to raise your hand and want to, and you do want to come back in. Ah, okay. So those agenda items for the Commission's high-level internet governance group, they're all in the open meeting. So that's the agenda in the morning. For anyone that's not familiar with the structure of the meeting, they have two-part agenda. The morning is open to so pretty much anyone that's interested in attending. The afternoon is a closed meeting for the member states and presumably other invited parties. So all of those items anyone can access, and if you look at the weekly update I sent out this morning, you'll see the full agenda for the meeting, as well as a link so you can register if you want to attend, and you do need to register in advance if you want to attend the meeting. Whilst we've been talking, Vinny has posted a message in the chat with the Win HTTP cert CFG utility help here, question mark for Tommy. I don't know, Tom, if you want to come back in on that, or if that's a discussion you want to pick up or offline, but you can certainly come back in if that will be helpful too.
I'm going to say offline so I don't take an embarrassing long time to double check here with everyone online.
Fair enough. Okay, I'll leave that as a sort of work in progress then. Fine. Well, thank you, Vinny, for the suggestion, nevertheless. Right. Okay. Anything else from anyone else, or any other questions you want to bring up this week? I can't see anything else in the chat. I can't see any hands raised, so I'll take that as not. So remember, next week, this time, we will all be engrossed, I think actually in the ADD working group. So we definitely won't have a call this time next week. So we will resume here in 2 weeks' time. But in the meantime, potentially, I may see many of you at IETF, either at the plenary and or working group sessions next week, and possibly at the HLRG meeting as well. So have a fantastic week and speak again in 2 weeks' time, if not before. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. Bye.
Bye all.
Thank you.